they did it in India, so we do it too, or Japan or whatever. It's not like that. Everything in Zen, there's a specific functional reason for it, like an athlete training, you know. So yeah, that's okay. Any other questions?
I'm good for right now, but I'm sure I'll have many more for you.
That's nice. I want to talk about the breathing, because some people were making some sounds breathing, which is very common.
Matt.
That was the only one.
No, well,
I'm just teasing.
So here's the thing. It's a very common thing. There's a thing in yoga called ujjayi breathing, where you do these various things with the sound. Okay, very different kind of thing. Although I think it was unconscious here, but it's very common. It's very super common. Happens a lot. The thing is this: if you imagine a mountain stream that's running down, and it's very shallow, but there's a lot of rocks and stuff, the sound that makes is like shh. Okay, so it's very noisy. It's very sort of trebly. Right? And then if you have ever stood before the ocean and the tide is moving, okay, you don't hear the tide, but you feel it. This whole thing is going, right? There's this massive pull going. It's really deep and low and really powerful, okay? So when you breathe with sound, your energy or chi or ki, different ways to talk about it, is getting dispersed. Right? So you're taking the power, and it is power, you're taking the energy that you're building up. When you concentrate into that little ember like that, you're actually building a power, a capacity to put your mind where you want it to be for as long as you want it to be there. It's called jariki, which means self-power. So it's the literal capacity to put your mind where you want it to be. You're building that when you're breathing and focusing. Every instant you spend doing that, you're actually making a little deposit in that. You're building up that capacity. But, interestingly, if you breathe like it keeps you on the outside of what you're doing. So you're always like, you're like out here, right? So you want to try, if you can, to really breathe just totally silently from here. Yeah. So ideally, if you really get good at this, it's entirely silent, and this doesn't move. This moves. So usually, not always, but usually when someone's making sound, again, not just you, right? But when we do this, when we make sound, the breath is all coming from up here. It sounds respiratory, right? It's up here, right? What we want is we want the ki and the breath and everything to be way down here in the root. So when I breathe, this isn't moving. This one's going. And so those two things kind of relate. All right? So a lot of times it's unconscious. I mean, the other way you can make sound breathing is you just get so into it, you forget. But try. You should try. Try to really be attentive to that. Okay. Any other things we'd like to talk about? Questions? Yeah.
I've noticed, from coming to the weekly meetings, that it seems like immediately after the meeting I'm kind of very mellow and very, I feel kind of drained, but then 30 minutes, an hour later, I have like this boost of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that completely normal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely you're playing with your body's energies when you do this. There's no mistaking that, And so in the beginning, it takes a while for us to find how to really regulate it well. And you do it automatically. No one has to sit here and spell all that out. If you actually sit every day, you'll start to feel it yourself. It just happens very naturally. It's like a puppy learns to walk, you know. If you spend time into sitting, you find all this stuff. You might not even be able to consciously articulate it. But you know, sometimes the breath wants to go a little more in for just a little while longer, and then sometimes it wants to go out really quick. And sometimes not. Sometimes it wants to go out really long and come in quick, right? And that's okay. Let your body breathe itself. Let the breath breathe itself, you know. You're actually regulating yin and yang energies when you do that. You know, if you're really in touch with your own body, it'll do that itself, just like if you eat an apple, it'll digest it. So you don't have to, like, you know, get the philosophy charts out and map your yin and yang and determine what breath to use or anything. It just happens, you know. But in the same way, when you start to sit, I mean, I have, well, yeah, you'll definitely find energetic things happening, and they're all fine, you know. I usually, now, I don't have much of a shift of state, and it's because I'm pretty much always in that space. In the very beginning, it was a radical difference. When I would sit for 20 minutes, like what my mind was like was not near what it was an hour before that, right? Because it was a really different kind of thing for me. I was not used to this, you know. I mean, there's these retreats called sesshin that we do, and I went to my first session when I was about your age, and it was like, whoa, man, you know, it was like many, many days in a row of just sitting like that. You know, walking meditation and some chanting and other stuff too, but really it's a lot of sitting. And when you put that much time in, that much zazen on top of zazen, on top of zazen for a day, and another day, and another day, you can imagine you get in a pretty deep space. Well, at first, that was like a radically different space to be in. And then gradually, as your practice becomes more integrated, it's just like kind of how you kind of are, you know. So the swings and the wild movements and the bursts of energy and stuff, it just kind of all equalizes to a kind of way, you know. So like I will typically sit, you know, before I go to bed. And it's totally cool, you know. Whereas before, I can remember that, you know. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like, it's a similar thing to like if you're a performer and you're not used to being on stage, right? And then you're on stage, and there's all these people looking at you, and you like do your gig, and it's like, whoa, and you get all this energy come in and everything because you're not used to that space. It seems like this really liminal moment because people are looking at you. You're playing your instrument or whatever. But when you get, like, that becomes normal. So it's like, you know, yeah, have some coffee, play a gig, talk with mom, you know. And that's not a bad thing. That's fine. That's a healthy thing. It doesn't mean it's less valuable. It means you're actually just integrated with it. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, everybody.